The Great Spaghetti Tree Hoax. It was easy when pasta was still a novelty. Adding our twist to stuffed pasta, what Britain brings to Italy's national dish. And flavour, texture, creaminess. Why use 4 different cheeses in one recipe? Today we're making one of my favourite pasta dishes, conchiglie, which is basically pasta shells. And we're going to be stuffing this with 3 cheeses, ricotta, gorgonzola and parmesan, mixed together with some spinach and pine nuts for that real Mediterranean flavour. But first of all, we need to pre-cook them in some boiling salted water.
The salt is just to increase the temperature that the water boils at, so it all cooks much faster.
And this is a special pasta cooker. If you don't have one of these at home, use the largest pan you could possibly find and fill it with lots of boiling salted water.
The reason for using so much water is to stop the pasta from sticking together. Pasta is a really starchy food, and as soon as you put it into the hot water, the starch molecules start to escape, and they get tangled up from one bit of pasta to another and make it stick together. But if you have plenty of water and it's boiling really vigorously, they move around and they don't get the chance to stick.
You can also give it a stir with a wooden spoon. That will keep it separate. Now the pasta has cooled off the water, so what we need to do is bring it back up to that rolling boil. The best way of doing it is by replacing the lid, just until it boils.
Now just look at all that foam. That's formed by the starch molecules that have escaped from the pasta.
Now that's going to take around about 8 minutes to cook, so it's time for us to have a look at the spinach. Now I'm not going to be adding any additional liquid to the pan. There's enough moisture on the outside from when we wash the spinach, and there's a lot of liquid also in the spinach itself.
And you start off with bundles of the stuff and it reduces down to almost nothing. And that's just because when the cells break open, they lose all their water. And it's almost like the opposite of what's happening in the pasta. Here you've got lots of water being lost, and there you've got the dried pasta that's gradually absorbing water.
Pasta is one of the simplest foods. A mixture of flour, water, sometimes egg. And it comes in many different guises.
Pasta is found all over the world. Every nation has a type of pasta. Noodles in Japan and China, dumplings in Central Europe, and a whole range of different types of macaroni and spaghetti in Italy.
In Britain we had dumplings, but it was a long time before pasta we'd recognise today really caught on.
Pasta became available during the 18th century from Italian warehousemen. It didn't catch on, though, with the main population, except in very English ways. One Manchester cook and confectioner called Elizabeth Raffald has a couple of recipes in a cookery book of 1769. One of them the Italians would just not do themselves. It's called a thatched house pie, and it's made by buttering a pie dish, lining it with a layer of cooked vermicelli, putting a layer of pastry over that, and filling it with some nice plump pigeons, baking it in the oven, and then turning it upside down so that the vermicelli stands out on top. It's one of the most elegant recipes of the period.
Mrs. Raffald wrote for the new wealthy merchant classes, but it was the aristocracy that brought Italian ways of cooking pasta to Britain.
There were many individuals who visited Italy. They were interested in the great cities and the classical heritage that they saw there. Rich young noblemen would go to Naples or Rome and get a real taste for Italian food.
The word macaroni was well known in England, even if the food wasn't. It was used to describe outrageously fashionable and foppish young men.
The young men were known as macaronis because they went on the grand tour, a lot of wealthy and upper middle class young gentlemen. And when they returned to England, they set up a club where they ate Italian food and delicacies that they had found when they were abroad. And one of their favourite dishes was macaroni.
Well, our pasta's ready. I prefer to undercook it slightly, a thing called al dente, which basically means to the tooth. It's cooked all the way on the outside, nice and soft, but on the inside there's quite a nice firm texture. A lot of recommendations on the packet tell you to cook it all the way through. I prefer to undercook mine.
Yeah, me too, absolutely. All commercial pasta is made out of durum wheat, which is the hardest wheat you can get. It forms a gluten structure that's incredibly strong and tough enough to withstand the extrusion process, which is what you need to make pasta. It also means that the pasta holds its shape better when you cook it.
Talking about holding its shape, we're going to stop the cooking process here. We'd like to take this over to the sink. We'll run some fresh water on it. It's called refreshing. Okay? Meanwhile, I think I'm going to cook an Italian tomato salad, which basically means plum tomatoes, which I'm going to slice and then scatter with loads and loads of garlic. We're going to place these tomatoes into the oven. You need lashing sprinkled over the top, and then a little bit of salt, a dusting of sugar. This is going to really sweeten the dish up. Some olive oil over the top of that, and a little bit of black pepper. Finish off with some chopped thyme. Now this goes into a preheated oven. And that will be beautiful.
In the last 20 years, the variety of pasta on sale all over the UK has exploded.
Pasta in this shop, we probably have 200 different shapes. Rigatoni, pinne, then you have fusilli, spaghettini, the orecchiette, bucatini. Different shapes are used for different purposes. Spaghetti traditionally used with fish sauces. Something like that you could put in the oven. These here are like spaghetti, but they have a hole going through. I used to hate these as a child. I would never ever eat them because I always used to say to my mum, "Oh no, you're making worms." You could have pasta 5 nights a week and think you're having a completely different meal every single night.
But pasta hasn't always been this easy to find. Italian immigrants brought some with them at the end of the 19th century, and they set up a handful of shops like Turonis in Britain's biggest cities.
My grandfather came to England in 1860. He opened up an Italian delicatessen in 1878. He was in an Italian quarter, and therefore they wanted pasta and all the rest, olive oil and stuff like that, and he started importing it.
The Turonis sold the shop 20 years ago to the Anessa family. By the time Luigi Turoni left, the shop wasn't just selling to Italians.
When we took this shop over from the Turoni family, 80% of our customers were Italian. Over the years, we've gone the other way. It's now 80% English.
My grandpa would have been very happy about seeing the expansion of pasta in England.
The rise of pasta has been extraordinary. In just 2 generations, this food has gone from being the occasional macaroni cheese to a major part of the British diet.
There's been a pasta explosion, there's no doubt of it. I mean, it started in the 50s. People in this country realising this was a food for them. We live in a sort of wet, uncomfortable sort of climate some of the time, and we like comfort foods. We like mash, we like batter, fish and chips and stuff like that. Now, pasta has that potato feel, it has that ease, that convenience and so on, bound to take off, and of course it did. It all began with canned pasta. Children ate it, liked it, the tomato sauce was excellent. The reason the British took to canned pasta was because there wasn't any pasta of any other kind. It proves to me that the palate was ready for pasta.
Now we can make that stuffing. I've got here the spinach, finely chopped. I've also got those dry roasted pine nuts, and they're going to give that lovely Mediterranean flavour, but they're also going to give that great texture. I've got 3 cheeses. We've got ricotta, we've got gorgonzola, and I've got Parmesan cheese. That's going to add a lovely flavour too.
These cheeses may look incredibly different, but they're made in just the same way, by fermenting milk, like all cheeses. The ricotta is a lovely young fresh cheese, so not very strong but very watery.
It's going to add a lovely texture to this dish. I'm just going to pour that in.
The gorgonzola smells incredibly strong. All that blue stuff is mould and there's loads of bacteria.
And that I'm adding for some superb flavour. Place that in.
And finally, the Parmesan. It's been aged for a long time, so it's lost lots of water. It's got a very high fat content, and it's very hard and very strong.
It smells great, and it tastes great, and it's going to give that lovely, true Italian flavour to this dish. I'm going to add a little bit of garlic, finely crushed, into the bowl, give it a last stir. Now the stuffing is ready to fill the shells.
In the 1950s, dried Italian pasta was still hard to get hold of outside cities. But in a few towns, that was about to change. In Bedford, 7,500 Italian workers came to work in clay pits and brickyards, supplying materials to rebuild Britain after the war.
When I came in England in 1955, I started to work here, and I stayed here for 12 years.
What did you do here? You used to pick up the clay from here to put in the wagons to take to the factory to be made into bricks.
Yes.
The workers were put up in hostels, previously used as prisoner of war camps. It was hard to get hold of their own foods.
When I come from Italy, I live here. In each room is 4 Italian. Here you have porridge in the morning, rice and beans dinner time, and on a Sunday morning you English breakfast, bacon, eggs and tomato. I never eat the pasta in this place, never. Oh, I missed the pasta, yeah.
After 4 years at the brickworks, the Italians were free to work elsewhere. And having longed to be able to get meals like back home, many started their own food businesses.
1966, I started with a mobile shop.
My dad did the driving, and as we would pull up and stop at a house, I would jump out and go and call the customer and tell them that we were there ready for them if they wanted to come and do their shopping.
25 years ago, I opened a bakery.
His dream has always been to be a baker, to bake Italian bread, not English bread.
The Italians could enjoy their bread and pasta at last, but to the British it was still a curious and unfamiliar foreign food, and that made it ideal for a television hoax.
The most magnificent of all April Fools was the 1957 Panorama, was devoted to this panning over these long, beautiful Italian hills with these shrubby bushes draped with long fronds of spaghetti.
The last 2 weeks of March are an anxious time for the spaghetti farmer. There's always the chance of a late frost, which, while not entirely ruining the crop, generally impairs the flavour.
It was huge fun, but it did show that spaghetti was something exotic enough for people to think, here's a bit of a laugh, nobody knows where spaghetti comes from, let's pretend it grows on trees.
Many people are often puzzled by the fact that spaghetti is produced at such uniform length. But this is the result of many years of patient endeavour by plant breeders who've succeeded in producing the perfect spaghetti.
But this ignorance wasn't to last. Europe was getting smaller with the age of the continental holiday.
Thousands of people, just like you, go abroad every year to see for themselves those magical places that have always tantalized them on picture postcards and awakened longings that at last they can satisfy.
In the 1950s, laws came in saying we'd have 40-hour weeks and everyone had a 2-week holiday, and that meant there was the boom in package tours abroad.
What's the Italian for sunburn? It's fun finding out, and Antonio will help you with the phrase book.
I think in 1958 or so, almost 1 million English tourists were hitting the Mediterranean coast. The fact that you might well have been to Italy and watched Italians eating Italian food in restaurants, and that made a tremendous difference to attitudes as to how you could eat.
When people got home, they wanted to repeat their Italian eating experiences. The time was right for a new wave of Italian restaurants.
In 1955, my father opened the first spaghetti house. The market must have been mature for his idea to take root. He had a slogan in the window which said spaghetti but not on toast. This obviously made a point that Spaghetti House was all about spaghetti as we the Italians know it and not as the English knew it at that time. There was a great buzz when Spaghetti House opened. It was very busy all the time. At lunchtime and in the evenings there were queues in front of the door.
They came from Cardiff, Camden, little places in Britain, and the planet Raxacoricophalopatorius.